Hey folks, my name is Pete Lewis. This is Claire Church. We're owners of the Muse Performance Space in Lafayette, Colorado. We're shut down right now and hope to be having events here in the next month or so. And we have our favorite trumpet player, got a friend of ours for a long time, world-renowned Greg Gisbert. He will be talking with us this afternoon about various topics. And Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Pete and Claire. How are you two doing?
We're doing okay. I mean, I'm teaching online. I'm finishing up my last year as a Boulder Valley school teacher, um, doing remote learning, which I'm not that good at. I'm really, and also my CU class, I'm really good in the classroom, but not so good at like what other regular classroom teachers do, which is all of this. But
Sure.
yeah, but I'm almost done with that. And we've been doing a lot of a cappella stuff with our little expeditions band. We've been trying to put that together. And yeah, so we're fine because we get along. And so we're stuck together, and that's okay.
And have you done any multi-track recording, the way people are doing their parts one at a time?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, we're doing the a cappella app, which is it's tricky because those little places where like maybe things go like this a little bit, like in real life, no big deal, right? But
right.
it can be very disconcerting.
I've heard that from a few friends that are doing editing, and they said it's a whole new challenge.
Yeah.
And did you say, Claire, that you're finishing up this year
Yeah,
teaching?
retiring from public school teaching. I'll still be at CU and my whole other career, everything else that I do.
Yeah, transitioning. I see.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. And both my parents were public school music teachers.
Really?
And my father had to, well, he stopped teaching public schools in 1972 when we moved up here. But my mom, that was her life, like watching her organize her lesson plans. She'd get home from school and she'd be writing up little suggestions and putting stickers on she was elementary school level, so she'd put stickers, if they practiced their lesson and did well. And no, she'd say, well, you're not getting a sticker, you didn't practice.
A lot of
But
planning. That type of music teaching, a lot of planning. What I did mostly, it was like rehearsing my own little professional big bands. And then of course the fifth graders are another story. That's
I
more.
remember seeing your band, one of your band's kids groups at Greeley a couple of years back, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really fun, great spirit.
Yeah, man, I miss those guys. I miss doing that. But there's a whole nother era starting for us, and Muse. We spend a lot of time on that, and plus I've been really practicing a lot, and my playing it's really coming along, man.
Fantastic. Well, when we open up, let's do a Crimson room together, the three of us. Let's
I would love that.
Rehearse, do a thing there, maybe do another thing at the Muse, and
Yeah.
make a whole weekend out of it.
Yeah, that was
That's
a gig that we had with you at the Muse with Expeditions. That
was fun. I loved that. I had such a good time, and I felt very free to play. I didn't feel like, because there are times when I play that I feel I'm swimming upstream or walking into a tornado in terms of the inner dialogue and inner analysis that happens while playing sometimes, or just trying to maintain musicality and play interactively and all that. And sometimes I feel like I'm walking into a tornado.
Yeah.
And because I just freeze up and I get tense and I have to go to that side of the brain that says, all right, I mechanically know this will work and I can execute this, so I'm going to play this and keep smiling. It's going to feel better eventually. And it always does. But when we played our gig, it started there. I was like, oh, I'm free. It felt so good.
That's really cool. That's weird to hear you say that because I never hear that in your playing. You always seem so free, like when you play.
I've learned how to fake it.
I mean, I
No,
think we all do that. I think we all do that. I do think that the Muse has a certain vibe that is comfortable and like open to whatever happens. And I also think our band has sort of developed this like, yeah, whatever happens.
And the people supporting it, they're genuine. It's such a beautiful vibe.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I love the Muse. It's a wonderful place, and to be there for like Brad Good's return, that was such a heartwarming, like
Mm-hmm.
so much love in the room. It was just incredible,
Yeah.
you know, and that's a reflection on Brad as a human being, his humanity, and his kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering honesty
For
in dealing with people
yeah.
in all spectrums of the music world. Well, just people in general, of course, but to see that turn out for him was just really, really heartwarming. Because I love me some Brad Good when, especially when he's like out there teaching and playing. That's like it's pretty remarkable, especially from a trumpet player's perspective. It's truly truly epic, you
Well,
know.
we'll pass that on to him for sure if he doesn't see
Well,
that.
he knows I love him,
Brad,
but
Brad and I go back something like 35 years. You know,
Yeah.
we were at the Aspen Music Festival together in 1984. So it's been a minute.
Do you remember those couple tunes I wrote for you for that gig? It was about a year ago. We still play those tunes. They just turned into part of the repertoire of our group.
oh, that's really cool. You know, they're probably swimming around my head.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll hear a little fragment and I'll be, gosh, what is that? I love that tune, but who is that? I've played it. I can't think of it, so I know it's swimming around in there. Do you ever have that, like, that your music brain records almost everything you hear, whether it's good or bad?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's in some ways I almost appreciate. I should say, maybe appreciate's not the right word, but I'm grateful for the times that like that I have in my head that are really bad playing that I've perpetuated or poor playing, because it reminds me that uh, to get on my fundamentals. Because I remember 30 years ago I could play something, hear it back, and I'd be like, oh, that sounds terrible, and I would take that home with me, and I would feel like, oh, I suck. I got to practice more. I shouldn't be doing this. Who did I think I was? Or the opposite of that, come home from a gig or recording or hear playback and feel like, wow, I'm really on to something. I should do an album. And then 10 years later, maybe hear those two recordings either in my head or actually have a recording to listen to, which thanks to YouTube, you can do this kind of research. And I listen to them both and I'm like, they're both okay. It's like, whatever, you know?
It,
So to be caught up in that dialogue
mm,
and judgment that can happen in the field that we're in,
it's tough.
there's a fine line, because to completely ignore it is to stagnate.
Right.
But to, like, I don't know, for me it took me up until about 35, 40 years old to like actually get out of my narcissistic self and entirely, you know, and like really see and hear the music and really see and hear the people I'm playing with. Because I was at an early age. Bobby Shue actually brought this up, but I was eavesdropping on a Zoom clinic he did last week. And when I logged in, Bobby goes, "Oh no, there he is. Did you show up to try to cut me again?"
Oh.
And he's like my hero. And he went off for a while, like about 5 minutes, and told all these young students, like, they said, like, you know, Greg's changed, but there was a time he was like so competitive that, and so just like possessed or something about playing and winning and perfection that it was like sometimes a drag. And that's one of the reasons I love Bobby Shue so much, is that he's always so damn truthful,
Mm.
like all the time. And a lot of people, myself included, sometimes cringe when something is so on the money. And I remember back in those days, he would say that, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" and now I'm 55, 54. I'm not sure, something like that. And 54. I'll go with a lower one. I think back and I was like, oh, I see it now. Every solo doesn't have to be like a home run. It doesn't have to be, the most jaw-dropping event of the song
Right.
or my personal night.
Right.
And to be able to grow out of that micro vision of playing my part or my concept or whatever, however I could label it, to break out of that and see the bigger picture was something that only happened because I started teaching at CCJA with Paul Romaine and started working with the age group. And I started to like really get a true education about what it is to play music by working with kids. So I admire what you do, Claire, so much. And Pete too. Like we have a lot of people in common, even like, I think Jacob Larson, there's one.
Yeah.
I just listened to his CD the other day. It's so good. Oh my God.
Yeah, he was a funny, wonderful person since he was like a little kid.
I could see he's probably been exactly how he is since day one.
Well, Greg, tell us about when you were a kid and what inspired you to play the trumpet, and how did you get into playing jazz, and just some.
Oh my gosh. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had to laugh because I just was talking with somebody the other day, telling them how Buddy Rich was my hero from the time that I could like hold drumsticks. My father had all the Buddy Rich albums, and then he had an 8-track player in the car, and he bought me one, and he let me have all his Buddy Rich 8-track tapes. So from the time I was able to understand how to operate an 8-track player, I had Buddy Rich playing until my parents would force me to turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I had posters of Buddy Rich. I had the one of him sitting with a sousaphone. You guys might remember this one. He's sitting on a chair with a sousaphone, and he says, if I couldn't play Zildjian, I would play this or something like that. And I had his album covers all over the room. But I was already at 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old too. For about 3 years, was already playing gigs with my father. I was playing drums, and I had my 5 beats. I had my rock beat, which is the same rock beat every kid has. I had my jazz beat, which sounds exactly like you would think that da ta 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 ta. But I had a tango, I had a rumba, and I had a bossa nova, and I had a waltz, and I knew how to play with the brushes just to make that scratchy sound. So when my dad's drummers wouldn't show up or couldn't show up, he would hire me. And so I wanted to be a drummer. I had no interest in playing the trumpet at all, zero. And when my parents, I wanted to play in the elementary school band, and I wanted to play drums, and they said, "Oh, you're going to be bored. You're so far advanced. You need to pick a different instrument." I said, "I don't want to play a different instrument." And I tried the clarinet for a second, but I had too many keys. And my mom played cornet, and she was really, really great. She could play the back of the Arbin book from memory flawlessly, and having not touched the instrument for like 5 years.
Wow.
I mean, she was truly amazing. She had the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. Like non-biased, the most incredible sound I've ever heard in my life. And it wasn't a typical classical sound either. It was like Chet Baker of classical. She had an airiness to her sound.
Wow.
But anyway, I got a little sidetracked. They said, play the cornet then. So I took the cornet to school. I didn't want to play it. I didn't like it. I didn't practice. And every day I would leave the cornet on the playground, hoping it would get stolen. And I would show up and it'd still be there. Then I started leaving it in traffic at Broadway and Arapahoe in Littleton, right in the turn lane. And my friend Paul Fletcher, best friend, I've known him for years and years and years, probably 49 years I've known him. He used to like rescue my trumpet on his bike, and he would bring it to my house and ring the doorbell. And he said, "You're going to get in so much trouble." And I said, "Stop doing that. I don't want it." I still have it to this day.
Oh my
that's great.
God.
The irony of that is when I wanted to be Buddy Rich, I mean that was my idol. There was this sound at the end of almost every song that I didn't like it. It sounded weird to me. And it was this sound that went like boop wee, which turns out to be lead trumpet, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out to be Bobby Shue.
Oh my
really?
God.
and
That's
and
be the best story anyone's ever told on these interviews.
really, well, it's pretty funny because I was such a Buddy Rich, like they call them budsters. I was a true budster. And I had this album called Plays and Plays and Plays. And on the liner notes, Buddy Rich, they're talking about how he played with Tommy Dorsey and Artie Shaw, Harry James, vaudeville, all that stuff. But they talked about how he was hired to play with Tommy Dorsey and he refused to play ballads. And Tommy Dorsey was a ballad band for the most part. So one day I'm listening to that record. My father comes home, he comes downstairs, says, "Son, get dressed for church. We're going to church." And I said to him, I was about 10 years old, hadn't started the trumpet. And I said, "Dad, if there is a God, I'll be Buddy Rich's ballad drummer." And my dad was pretty into going to church every week when he was off the road. And I remember him picking me up and carrying me into the church in my little like giraffe pajamas or something. I don't know why they got me giraffe pajamas. I'll never know. But so about 8-9 years later, I'm playing with Buddy Rich. And on the album cover, on the liner notes, it says he handed the brushes to a trumpet player on his left, whose name was Ziggy Elmond. And so 9 years later, we're in Pennsylvania playing with Buddy Rich, and somebody says, feature the local kid who was from that town, tenor player. His name was Chris. And Buddy said, "What do you want to play, Chris?" And he said, "Body and Soul." And Buddy says, "I don't effing play ballads." He hands me the brushes, and he walks out of the building.
No.
And I sat down, and I was Buddy Rich's ballad drummer.
Oh my
That's man.
God.
All of that from that question about the trumpet.
That's an amazing story.
So you went on 18 with Buddy Rich.
I was 19 years old. I had left. I was at Berkeley. I was going to start my second year at Berkeley. And it was Bobby Shue who introduced me to Buddy Rich, probably in February, about 6 months before I joined the band. And Eric Miyashiro, the lead trumpet player, who lives in Tokyo now, great educator, writer, teacher, musician, band leader. He had been trying to get me on the band for like 6 months because Buddy kept firing trumpet players left and right. Well, one day he fired another one, and Eric said, "Can I try Bobby Shue's student?" And he said, "All right, tell him he's got one night."
Wow.
And I had one night.
Holy crap.
And on that first night, the first tune went really well, and then the nerves kicked in. And the adrenaline that Buddy Rich played with, I've never heard or experienced anything that gave me that much of an adrenaline rush, including bungee jumping. It was a close second, but any tune to play with Buddy Rich was like, for so many reasons, was like plugging into like, some AC current or something. And second tune, I got so nervous, I tried to solo, and I picked up a plunger to play on in a mellow tone, and I had no business playing a plunger. I didn't know how to use it, but I figured Duke Ellington, that's what you're supposed to do. Very green, naive, well-intentioned, underprepared, underqualified at that time. And so I start playing, and he cues the last note of the song. He just screams to the band, like, "Last note," and they go to the last note. right in the middle of the solo.
Woo.
He got off his drums. It was an outdoor amusement park, and they had set up a giant tent for concerts and beer tent and that sort of thing. And so there was makeshift walls. They were like, it was scaffolding with big black cloth hung over it. So Buddy got off his drums and he pinned me up against the scaffolding with his forearm, kind of like that. And he screamed at me, "Relax and swing or I'll kill you." And I laughed. But I was also terrified. He says, "You think that's funny? I'll show you funny." And then he made me stretch on 3 or 4 tunes in a row until I couldn't get a single note out while he screamed at me. But he never fired me. He just tortured me.
Relax and swing or I'll kill you.
And apparently he said that to quite a few people. I've told that story with some Buddy Rich people. They're like, "Yeah, that's that. He said that to us."
You must have heard the potential there, though, or you must have, your first tune probably went great.
Oh my
Because,
God.
this kid's got it, man.
To this day, I think it was because I was shorter than him. Because he fired some tall people that were much better players.
Oh, jeez.
Well,
That's the God's honest truth.
what I think though about your lead playing that I remember loving about your lead playing is that you would play phrasing, ebb and flow of dynamics and subtlety in the line, even way up in those ranges. And you just don't hear a lot of people do that. That's what I like. I love your lead playing.
Oh, thank you, Claire. That's something that I grew up wanting to be able to do and loving. And then as soon as I got to Berkeley and I heard Eric Miyashiro play, I was like, there's no way on God's earth I could possibly be a good lead player after hearing the level that he was on. And I started focusing on soloing more. And so on Buddy Rich's band, I played third and Eric played lead. And I remember I couldn't even get through a single set for about a year without running out of gas on the third book.
Wow.
The only reason I ended up becoming an actual lead player again or reigniting that desire was Maria Schneider. She had said, "Hey, when Tony subs out, would you mind playing lead? Because you play the second book, the phrasing." And I told her, I said, "I don't have the chops to play lead. I'm going a completely different direction. And, this is New York City, is a much better options than me. Trust me." And she said, "No, well, you know the music, so I want you to do it. I don't care if you miss the high notes."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I do. I don't want to miss the high notes, and I know I'm going to." And I did for several years. But it's actually thanks to Maria Schneider that I'm a lead player.
Wow.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's unusual for true lead players to be really great soloists, in my experience. So there's that.
Well, I think we come from the same generation, so and woodwind players were having to dive into that world much earlier than brass players, the world of versatility.
Yeah.
So starting in about the late 60s, the flugelhorn became popular thanks to Clark Terry and then also Burt Collins and Joe Shepley. And back then, at least when I moved to New York, the fact that I could read pretty well and I could play in a section, I could passively. I was still sort of focused only on my part in those days, very young and naive and closed ears, if that makes sense. I just had my thing I wanted to prove I could do.
Yeah.
And so back then my section playing was so. But I could read and I could solo and I could play up to a high F on the trumpet. So, and sometimes a G. So that was kind of an oddity for new players in New York. You were either a lead player or you were a commercial section player, studio player, or you were a soloist. And a lot of players didn't cross over to play a classical style Broadway show and then play the Vanguard band.
Yeah.
The jazz players, they were always on shows that were, the contractor called them because they could swing and they could play funk music and they could play pop music and sound commercial. Then they had the other shows, which they would call legit shows. So to be able to play lead and read and play in a section and solo was like actually set me apart from a lot of for in the sense that I was hireable in some situations that other great players weren't necessarily hireable.
Yeah.
And now that bar has raised due to the contributions of people like Sean Jones, who comes to mind right away, who's not only just such a great educator and a great cat. I don't know if do you know Sean?
Not
A little
personally.
bit.
Oh my gosh, please, if he shows up to play somewhere, you get to see him, please go talk to him. He's like, yeah, he's just like, he's the real deal. I love that cat. And he raised the bar, and he's raised the bar with all his students too. I recently saw something that was a collection of his routines that he does and his teaching, his pedagogy, and all that. And I looked at it. I said, I can't do hardly any of that. So I'm starting to practice that stuff.
Wow.
But he raised the bar by bringing the element of classical playing and being a lead player, great reader, great leader, great writer, great arranger, great teacher. I think nowadays for our younger students that we have, the music and being a musician, the requirements are still evolving. And I think that we're going to witness in our lifetime, and already have in some ways, the true game changers. Like we can obviously say Louis Armstrong was a game changer, King Oliver, game changer, uh, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, all game changers, Miles Davis, Dizzy, Bird. There's been a lot of them that come around. Chris Potter, Roy Hargrove, people that like take the music and they have the tradition and the history in their music, and they have the passion for it, and they bring it into total relevance into today's world, into our world, to their world. And I think what we're going to see coming from the next few generations is going to be mind blowing.
Yeah.
I really do. The music is in a very healthy state.
That's encouraging.
That's great. You don't hear that from people very often, especially right now.
These guys, these kids scare me sometimes. I'm like, whoa, all right, I'll take my musical beating like with dignity up here, but I'm not going to chicken out. But I hear some of the like Philip Dzak down. He's teaching at North Texas. His playing and his writing, his whole concept is so broad and deep. Are you familiar with Philip?
No.
Oh my gosh, yeah. He's just like it's def. I'll look for a link and send it to you.
But I think what you're saying, like we're so, as woodwind players, of course, I'm not a woodwind player anymore, but I certainly came up doing that. You are expected 100%. You're expected to play classical and solo and read really well and double and be virtuosic on your doubles and play all the doubles. And that's just what you're expected to do.
Greg, do you think part of it too is like the education is developed into this great platform? You know, there's just really good education. Before it was like, we have a jazz band program or we have a stage band, you know, and now it's like solid jazz education with cats like you and people who are in there doing it, who are also good teachers, you know. And then these kids coming out of here just have all this great information, and there is so much information out there. So you know, I think there's a lot for them to absorb at an early age.
I try to think of. I'm gonna get rid of these things that popped up. Sorry. I think to wrap up the question or the topic we were talking about before, that brass players had to like catch up to what woodwind players have had to do for a long time, and going to the education component. I think that the acceleration was restarted when Wynton Marsalis became head of jazz at Lincoln Center. I think that entire Columbia Records made him a star, but getting to know him and playing with him, that was not on his priorities at all, being a star. His priorities have been solely focused on education
Mm-hmm.
and integrity. And he brings it everywhere he goes, every environment. And now he's been doing that for over 30 years. So I think of all the people that have been in contact with Wynton Marsalis in various ways, and one of them is Sean Jones, who came out of that and has evolved from that. And I mean, 20 years ago, there wasn't the Jazz at Lincoln Center youth program. That didn't exist. They did some teaching, but it wasn't like it is now. 20 years ago, there was not a CCJA. So I think that the level is just going to keep rising. And I don't know. I usually find that when I hear somebody saying, "Oh, these kids are not playing," I don't get all that. I believe that they don't get all that. My father was a musician, and things that I liked, players that I liked, he was just like, "Whatever, son." I was listening to Woody Shaw, like, and Coltrane Resolution, and he was like, "Why don't you listen to the Coltrane Ballads album with Johnny Hartman? Now that's music, son." And I said, "They're both great." And he's
Yeah.
like, "Okay," but he came from his era, so I think that one of the things that I keep an open mind about is what I watch what my students, my young friends and young students are doing, and I think that's probably where it's going. And if I could be aware of that dynamic, like how I can now see how fun it would be to if I knew a DJ that was doing serious scratching and rapper that was like doing serious freestyling, and somehow our chemistry was right. That to me it sounds like it would be incredibly fun and very free. To go back to like first thing of the day, it was like very free feeling to play in that context because there's nothing to compare it to.
Right. Well,
You know,
yeah.
it's so
That's what Miles
anyway.
and he said, if I had to go back and do that shit, it would kill me, or something like that. Like I
I
could.
think it might bore him to death, probably.
It's like I couldn't do that again. I couldn't do that again. It would kill me.
Well, Greg,
Wow.
what do you have projects that you're hoping to complete in the near future, kind of once the pandemic kind of settles down, or certain gigs that you're looking forward to maybe starting up again?
Yes. Thank you, Pete. That's a great question. Some of the Maria Schneider stuff is on hold or being rescheduled. We were supposed to be on tour as we speak.
Uh,
And her new album's coming out on May 9th. That's kind of exciting. Uh, I'm looking forward to getting back and playing the jam session at Dazzle. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that started sometime in the next few months to a year. Looking forward to just going to hear people at Dazzle. Crimson Room, I had a bunch of dates that were postponed, and Brian there is great too, and Stu booking the room. They have they're just gonna have to like piggyback for a while and leapfrog dates to people. And so I'm looking forward to doing some of those. The CCJA group has been doing online teaching, and in the sense of like group lectures, and they're doing all their concert songs one part at a time. So we're looking forward to what the kids do. That's pretty exciting. And let's see, as far as I bought a computer, I turned it on. It arrived 2 days ago. I turned it on yesterday. I bought a microphone. So I'm looking forward to learning how to use this 4-track recorder microphone with a computer. And I think I'm going to embrace staying home for a while again.
yeah.
While the rest of the world is rushing out to dive back into the petri dish. I think I'm going to embrace the idea of, first of all, learning how to teach online on a small scale, and then kind of make that more of priority for see how that works for a couple years. Brenda and I are getting married August 15th. I put the ring on her finger Sunday.
Oh yeah.
She said yes.
That's great, man. Congratulations.
She's a keeper.
Oh my gosh, I love her with all my heart.
Oh, I'm
She's
so
the best.
guys.
That's awesome.
So those are some exciting events happening.
Yeah, well, that's great.
What about you? Do you guys have a sort of a target date to play and bring it back?
Hopefully just get the Muse going,
We hope to get some live streaming going sooner than live shows. Obviously, we can bring in like 4 musicians and live stream. So we're starting to work on what we need for that to make it really work well and be good. And then hopefully continue once we're up and running with live music. We'll still have a platform where people can stream stuff for a subscription or something. So that's on the horizon.
That's wow.
Yeah, and we're still trying to figure out how to get our own bands working more. I want to play. I still really want to play. Before it's
well, count me in on the next one with you because I'd love to do that.
Definitely, man. Do you have any words of encouragement, wisdom, or anything you want to leave the listeners with?
My friend Pat Lee, she's the great bassist John Lee's wife, and she's so soulful. It's actually Dizzy Gillespie introduced the two of them. Dizzy was their matchmaker. And Pat Lee would always remind me in my younger days, she'd say, Clark Terry had a nickname for me. He called me Greggles, and she knew that. So she would say, Greggles, rule number 6. And rule number 6 is don't take yourself too damn seriously.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So there you go. That's my suggestion. Rule number 6.
I love it, man.
All right.
It's great.
Man, that was a fabulous
great stories,
time.
man.
Oh, thank you for including me. This is so much fun.
We're gonna well thank you very much, and we hope we see you again sooner than later, and be well, and congrats. Tell Brenda we congratulate her on her catch. You're a catch.
Oh wow, you're gonna make me blush. That's great.
All right.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll see you soon.
Bye, Greg.